Welcome in, everybody, to this deep dive. We're going to be talking about Elif Shafak's Black Milk, and I am so excited about this one. It is such an insightful look into, the challenges and joys of being a woman and a writer and a mother, and how all those roles kind of like intertwine and sometimes clash. It's a really fascinating exploration of creativity and identity and, that whole like work-life balance thing that we're all constantly trying to figure out.
Yeah, I think what makes Shafak's book so relatable is that she's not afraid to be honest about the struggles.
Yeah.
You know, she doesn't sugarcoat anything. She really dives into those like messy, complicated feelings that come with trying to be everything to everyone. And
Mm.
she does it with this like incredible blend of humor and vulnerability.
Absolutely. And one of the things I love about her writing is that she uses all these different literary devices to kind of like bring her internal struggles to life. She's got this like choir of discordant voices in her head, these like different aspects of her personality that are constantly arguing with each other about how she should live her life.
Oh yeah, those finger women, they're hilarious. Yeah. But they also represent like these very real anxieties that a lot of women face,
Mm.
like the pressure to be successful in your career, but also be a good mom and a good wife and like have it all together all the time.
Right. And it's like
Uh,
those expectations are coming from all sides,
uh,
society, family, even our own like internalized beliefs about what it means to be a woman.
Totally. And Shafak really gets into that whole like societal conditioning thing. You know how women are often taught to prioritize others' needs above their own, and how that can make it really hard to carve out space for your own creative pursuits.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, Shafak actually wrote a manifesto of the single girl earlier in her life where she was like all about defining herself outside those traditional roles.
Mm.
So it's like she was already wrestling with these ideas about identity and freedom long before motherhood even entered the picture.
And that's what makes Black Milk so powerful, I think.
Yeah.
It's not just a book about motherhood, it's about womanhood.
Hmm.
It's about finding your voice and your place in the world on your own terms.
Okay, so let's dive into the book itself. The story actually starts with Shafak on a ferry in Istanbul, and she encounters a pregnant woman. And this seemingly ordinary moment triggers this like huge wave of anxiety in her, like this fear of what motherhood might mean for her writing.
And it's not just about the practical challenges of finding time to write with a baby,
Mhm.
It's deeper than that. It's about this fear of losing her identity, of being consumed by motherhood, of having her creative spark extinguished.
Yeah, and you can see those anxieties playing out throughout the book. Like when she goes to visit this other prominent Turkish novelist, Adalet Agoglu, and they have this conversation about the whole babies or books dilemma.
Uh, that scene is so interesting because Ayoglu is like this super successful writer who chose not to have children. And
Yeah.
she talks about how like sometimes you have to make these tough choices in life. And it really makes you think about like, can you truly have it all, or are there always going to be trade-offs?
Right. And it's like that question of having it all is so loaded,
Yeah.
because what does that even mean? And who gets to define it? And how do we navigate those expectations without sacrificing parts of ourselves along the way?
It's a constant balancing act. And Shefak doesn't pretend to have all the answers, but she does offer some really insightful perspectives on how to navigate those challenges.
Yeah, one of the concepts she explores is Virginia Woolf's idea of the civ woman, this image of a woman who's constantly leaking time and energy on domestic duties and never having enough left over for her own creative pursuits.
Right. And it's not just about time management. It's about the mental and emotional energy that gets drained by all those like invisible tasks that women are often expected to take on,
Yeah.
like the caregiving, the emotional labor, housework.
Totally. And it's like that feeling of being constantly depleted makes it so much harder to access that like creative flow state.
Yeah.
Like your well is just empty.
Exactly. And Shafak doesn't just present this concept in the abstract. She connects it to her own experiences and to the story of Firuz, this fictional character in the book whose poetic talent is stifled by the limitations placed on women in her society.
Yeah, that story is heartbreaking, but it also highlights this like historical reality. For centuries, women's creative voices have been silenced or marginalized or simply not given the same opportunities as men.
It makes you wonder how any women managed to become successful writers in the past. Like what sacrifices did they have to make? What hurdles did they have to overcome?
It's a testament to their strength and resilience, and it also underscores how important it is to keep fighting for equality and representation in the literary world and beyond.
Absolutely. We need to keep creating space for women's voices to be heard and celebrated. And that includes voices that are messy and complicated and don't fit neatly into any boxes.
Totally. And I think that's where Shafak's own choir of discordant voices comes in. It's her way of like acknowledging and embracing the multiplicity of her own identity.
Yeah, those finger women, are like these different facets of her personality, each with their own anxieties and desires and opinions about how she should live her life.
So we've got Miss Ambitious Chakovian, who's all about career goals and achievement. And then there's Dame Dervish, who represents like her spiritual side and her search for inner peace. And of course, there's Miss Highbrowed Cynic, who basically thinks everything is pointless and everyone is secretly miserable.
And let's not forget Little Miss Practical, who's all about like efficiency and problem solving. And then there's Mama Rice Pudding, who embraces traditional values and domesticity. And last but not least, we have Bluebell Bovary, who's the embodiment of passion and romanticism.
Like a whole cast of characters living in her head.
Huh?
And they're constantly like bickering and debating and trying to steer her in different directions.
And it's hilarious, but it's also like a really clever way to explore the internal conflicts that so many of us face, like the struggle between our desires and our responsibilities, our dreams and our fears.
And then, just as these finger women are settling into their usual back and forth, Shafak throws a major curveball into the mix.
Boy, what happened?
She gets pregnant.
Oh, wow, that's going to shake things up.
You have no idea. The finger women go absolutely bonkers. They stage a full-blown coup d'etat. It's like a comedic play within the book.
I can only imagine the chaos.
Yeah.
So how do they try to protect Shafak from motherhood?
Oh, they pull out all the stops. Some try to sabotage her writing, whispering doubts and distractions in her ear. Others try to control her diet, her social life, even her sleep schedule, all in the name of preserving her creative energy.
Wow, they sound intense.
They are. But it's also really funny. Like, Shafak doesn't shy away from the absurdity of it all. But beneath the humor, there's this, like, really poignant exploration of the very real anxieties that women face when they become mothers.
Yeah, like that fear of losing yourself in motherhood, of sacrificing your dreams, of not being able to measure up to all those societal expectations.
Exactly. And it's those expectations that we're going to dig into next. So stay tuned.
So let's unpack these expectations a bit. We were talking about those finger women and how they each represent a different facet of Shafak's internal struggle with motherhood. Let's start with Miss Ambitious Chakovian. She's like the embodiment of that career-driven woman who's afraid that having a baby will derail her entire life.
Yeah, she's got those spreadsheets color-coded and everything. She's planned out her career trajectory down to the minute. And then suddenly there's this, like, tiny human who's completely reliant on her. And it throws her whole world into chaos.
Right. And it's not just about the practical challenges of balancing work and childcare. It's also about the societal messages that she's internalized, Like that whole idea that a woman can't be both a good mother and a successful professional.
It's like she's afraid of being judged, of not living up to some impossible standard of what it means to have it all. And then, of course, there's the guilt, that feeling that she's somehow failing both as a mother and as a writer.
And it's interesting how Shafak contrasts Miss Ambitious Chakovian with Dame Dervish, who represents like her more spiritual side.
Yeah, Dame Dervish is all about finding inner peace and acceptance. She's the one who's like, let go of attachments, embrace the present moment. But even she's got anxieties about motherhood.
Right, because it's like, how do you maintain that sense of serenity and equanimity when you're dealing with like sleepless nights and diaper blowouts and the constant demands of a tiny human?
It's like that saying, having a baby is like throwing a grenade into your marriage. But in this case, it's like throwing a grenade into your carefully cultivated spiritual practice.
And then you've got Miss Highbrowed Cynic, who's like the ultimate skeptic.
Oh, Miss Highbrowed Cynic, she's my favorite. She's the one who's like, love is an illusion, happiness is fleeting, we're all just dust in the wind.
And, she sees motherhood as this like ultimate trap, this descent into the mundane and the meaningless.
Like she's afraid of losing her intellectual edge, her ability to see through the bullshit of society, her sharp wit.
Exactly. And it's like she's almost mourning the loss of her former self. The self that was free and independent and unburdened by the responsibilities of family life.
It's like she's become a character in one of those Chekhov plays that she so admires. Filled with longing and disillusionment.
And then there's Little Miss Practical, who's the complete opposite of Miss Highbrowed Cynic. She's all about, like, problem solving and efficiency. She's got lists and schedules and color-coded calendars for everything.
Oh, Little Miss Practical. She's the one who's like, okay, we've got a baby on the way. Let's break down the logistics. How are we going to manage our time, our finances, our sleep schedules?
Right. She's the voice of reason in all the chaos. But even she's got anxieties about motherhood. Like, will she be able to maintain her carefully ordered life? Will she be able to handle the unpredictability of a newborn?
It's like she's afraid of losing control, of being swept away by the overwhelming demands of parenthood.
And then there's Mama Rice Pudding, who represents, like, the more traditional side of Shafak's personality.
Yeah, Mama Rice Pudding. She's all about like home-cooked meals and cozy family gatherings and creating a warm and nurturing environment for her child.
Right? She embraces those traditional values of motherhood. But she also carries the weight of those expectations.
Yeah.
Like the pressure to be the perfect mom, to do everything right, to never make a mistake.
And that pressure can be so intense, you know? It's like society tells women that their primary role is to be mothers and that they need to be selfless and nurturing and always put their children's needs first.
And it can lead to a lot of guilt and self-doubt,
Yeah.
like that feeling that you're not doing enough or that you're not good enough.
And then, of course, we have Bluebell Bovary, who's like the wild child of the group.
Oh, Bluebell Bovary. She's the one who's like, I want to live a life filled with passion and adventure and romance.
Yeah.
And she's terrified that motherhood will extinguish that spark.
Yeah, she's afraid of becoming trapped in domesticity, of losing her sense of self, of having her desires and dreams subsumed by the needs of her child.
It's like she's mourning the loss of her freedom,
Mhm.
her individuality, her ability to pursue her own happiness.
And it's interesting because Bluebell Bovary's anxieties really get to the heart of what Shafak is exploring in Black Milk. It's not just about the challenges of balancing motherhood and writing. It's about the bigger question of how women can live authentic and fulfilling lives in a world that often tries to confine them to narrow roles.
Exactly. It's about challenging those societal expectations and finding a way to honor all the different facets of your identity.
And I think that's what makes Shafak's book so relatable and so important. It's a reminder that we're all complex beings with multiple desires and ambitions, and that it's okay to struggle, to feel conflicted, to not have all the answers.
Totally. And it's also a celebration of the messy beauty of womanhood.
Yeah.
The strength and resilience and creativity that women bring to the world.
So now that we've met all the finger women and explored their anxieties about motherhood, let's talk about how they actually react when Shafak announces her pregnancy.
Wait, you said they staged a coup d'etat? What does that even look like?
Oh, it's hilarious. Like, imagine a bunch of roommates suddenly freaking out because their living situation is about to change drastically, except in this case, the roommates are all different aspects of Shafak's personality.
Okay, I'm intrigued. So what kind of tactics do they use to try to sabotage her pregnancy?
Oh, they pull out all the stops. Some try to convince her that she's not ready to be a mother, that she's going to ruin her life, that she's going to lose her creativity. Others try to control her every move, like dictating what she can eat and drink and how much sleep she should be getting.
Wow, they sound intense.
They are, but it's also really funny. Like, Shafak uses this kind of absurdist humor to explore some very real anxieties about motherhood. Like that fear of losing control of your body, your mind, your life.
Yeah, and that pressure to do everything right, to be the perfect pregnant woman, to have the perfect birth plan, to be the perfect mother.
And it's interesting because as Shafak is navigating all this internal chaos, she's also turning to the lives of other literary mothers for inspiration and guidance.
Oh, that's cool. So who do you look to?
She delves into the stories of writers like Sylvia Plath and Toni Morrison and Louisa May Alcott. And she explores how they each navigated the challenges of balancing motherhood and creativity.
That's so fascinating because it shows that these struggles aren't unique to Shafak. Women have been grappling with these issues for centuries.
Exactly. And it's like, by looking at how these other writers dealt with these challenges, Shafak is able to gain some perspective on her own situation.
So what does she learn from them?
Well, she realizes that there's no one-size-fits-all solution. Some writers thrived in motherhood, while others found it incredibly challenging. Some were able to maintain their creative output, while others struggled to find the time or energy to write.
It's a reminder that every woman's journey is different, and that there's no right or wrong way to be a mother or a writer.
Exactly. And it's also a reminder that it's okay to ask for help. Shafak talks about how important it was for her to have a supportive partner and family members who could help her with the practical aspects of childcare.
Yeah, that's so crucial because it's impossible to do everything on your own. And it's okay to acknowledge that you need support.
And what's really interesting is that as Shafak gets further along in her pregnancy, her internal voices actually start to shift and evolve.
Really? How so?
Well, instead of being these warring factions, they start to become more integrated. They start to work together to support Shafak on her journey to motherhood.
It's like they realize that they're all on the same team and that their goal is to help Shafak thrive, not to sabotage her.
Exactly. And it's this process of integration that ultimately leads Shafak to the crystal heart metaphor that we were talking about earlier.
Oh, yeah, that's such a powerful image. So can you remind us what that metaphor represents?
Sure. So the crystal heart represents Shafak's journey of healing and self-acceptance. After she gives birth, she experiences postpartum depression, and she feels like her whole world has shattered. But through therapy and self-care and writing, she's able to slowly piece herself back together.
It's like she's taking those broken fragments and transforming them into something beautiful and resilient.
Exactly. And the crystal heart is more intricate and more luminous because of those cracks and fissures. It's a reminder that our imperfections don't diminish our worth. They actually make us stronger and more unique.
That's such a beautiful message, and it's
Mhm.
so important for women to hear. We're often bombarded with messages about perfection and flawlessness,
Yeah.
and it can be so liberating to embrace our imperfections and to see them as sources of strength.
Absolutely. And I think that's what makes Black Milk such a powerful and inspiring read. It's a story about resilience and self-discovery and the transformative power of motherhood.
So what happens next? Does Shafak eventually find a way to balance motherhood and writing?
That's a great question. And that's what we'll be exploring in the final part of our deep dive into Black Milk. So
Right.
stay tuned.
So we left off with Shafak kind of piecing herself back together, after postpartum depression hit. And she's starting to embrace this idea of the crystal heart. But does she actually find her way back to writing? Like, how does she make that happen with a newborn?
Well, it's not easy, that's for sure. I mean, anyone who's ever had a baby knows that those first few months are like a complete whirlwind. It's like you're living in a different dimension where time has no meaning and sleep is a distant memory.
Yeah, so true. But I think what's really inspiring about Shafak's story is that she doesn't give up on her writing.
Yeah.
Even when she's exhausted and overwhelmed and feeling like she's lost her creative spark, she keeps coming back to it.
She starts small, like she writes these little letters to her unborn child, then to her newborn baby. It's like a way of staying connected to that part of herself that needs to create.
It's almost like those letters are a lifeline.
Yeah.
That they're a way for her to hold on to her identity as a writer, even when everything else in her life feels like it's been turned upside down.
And gradually, those little letters start to turn into something more. She starts to find little pockets of time here and there to write, and those pockets of time eventually expand into longer stretches.
I think what's really key here is that she gives herself permission to write whatever comes to mind.
Hmm.
She's not putting pressure on herself to produce a masterpiece or to write a certain number of words every day. She's just letting the words flow.
Exactly. And it's in those moments of free-flowing creativity that she starts to rediscover the joy of writing, that
Yeah.
feeling of getting lost in the words, of creating something out of nothing.
And it's like as she rediscovers that joy, her confidence starts to come back and she starts to believe in herself as a writer again.
And what's really cool is that her internal voices, those finger women, they're still there, but they're not fighting so much anymore.
Really? So what happened to them? Did they finally chill out?
Well, it's more like they've learned to coexist. They've realized that they all have something valuable to contribute
Right.
and that they're stronger together than they are apart.
So instead of trying to silence certain voices, Shafak learns to listen to them all and to find a way to integrate them into her creative process.
Exactly. It's like she's become a conductor of her own internal orchestra. Finding a way to harmonize the different melodies and rhythms into a unique and beautiful symphony.
And it's that harmony that allows her to finally find a balance between motherhood and writing.
Hmm.
It's not like those two parts of her life suddenly become effortless or perfectly synchronized.
Oh, no. It's still messy and challenging, and there are days when she feels like she's failing at both. But she's learned to embrace the messiness, to accept that it's okay to not have it all figured out.
And that's such an important message, I think, especially for women who are often bombarded with these like unrealistic expectations of what it means to be a good mother and a successful professional.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's like Shafak is giving us permission to let go of those expectations and to find our own definition of success.
And to embrace the journey,
Mm.
the ups and downs, the twists and turns, the moments of joy and the moments of despair.
Because it's all part of the process. And it's in those messy, imperfect moments that we often discover our greatest strengths and our deepest truths.
So true. And I think what's really inspiring about Shafak's story is that she doesn't just find a way to balance motherhood and writing. She actually finds a way to integrate them. They become these two intertwined threads that weave together to create the tapestry of her life.
It's like motherhood becomes a source of inspiration for her writing, and her writing becomes a way for her to process and make sense of the experience of motherhood.
And it's through this integration that she's able to find a deeper sense of purpose and meaning in both roles. It's not about sacrificing one for the other. It's about finding a way to honor both.
And I think that's a really powerful message for all of us. No matter what challenges we're facing in our lives, we can always find a way to tap into our creativity and to use it as a tool for healing growth and transformation.
Absolutely. And I think Black Milk is a great reminder that the journey is just as important as the destination. It's in those messy, imperfect moments that we often discover the most beautiful and unexpected truths about ourselves.
Well said. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive into Elif Shafak's world. We hope you found it insightful and inspiring, and we encourage you to check out Black Milk for yourself. If you're looking for a thought-provoking and deeply personal exploration of motherhood creativity and the search for identity, you won't be disappointed.
Thanks for listening, everyone. And remember to embrace the messiness, honor your inner voices, and never give up on your creative dreams.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep creating, and keep diving deep into the world of ideas.